I died on a Wednesday. Not with drama or glory, but in a hospital bed no one visited, betrayed by the man I trusted most and forgotten by the family I once bled for. The last thing I saw was his hand in hers, my sister, smiling like she hadn't just stolen everything from me. And then, I opened my eyes in silk sheets, sunlight spilling through the windows of the penthouse I hadn't seen in a decade. My phone read a date I remembered with eerie precision. Exactly 1 year before the wedding that shattered me. I stared at my hands, smooth again, young again, and knew one thing for sure. I'd been given a second chance. Not to forgive. Not to forget. But to flip the board and become the one no one could betray. My name is Layla Hart. In my last life, I was soft. Sweet. Willing to dim myself so others could shine. I worked for my fiancé's family business, Rivers Group, and believed they'd eventually see me as one of their own. Instead, I became a placeholder. A stepping stone for my sister Olivia to walk over when she showed up with prettier lies and a sharper smile. And the Rivers brothers, Theo, Micah, and Julian, each played their part in my downfall. Theo, the oldest, cool and untouchable, signed the partnership that removed me from my position. Micah, the charming middle one, distracted me while they reshuffled the company beneath my feet. And Julian, the youngest, had been the one to hold me at night, kiss my forehead, and whisper promises he never intended to keep. But now I was back. Reborn. And I wasn't here to be part of their empire, I was here to burn it down. Step 1 was getting back into the building. And as fate would have it, the perfect opening came through a consulting firm I'd built in secret under a pseudonym. My alias? L. Harlow. With a sharp portfolio, fake references, and more insider knowledge than any analyst on the market, L. Harlow got invited to Rivers Group headquarters within a week. I wore a black dress. Not to mourn, but to warn. Julian was the first to notice me. He passed me in the lobby and did a double take, eyes widening like he'd seen a ghost. Have we met? He asked. I smiled slowly. Not in a way that mattered. He blinked, confused. But before he could say more, Micah stepped off the elevator. L. Harlow, he said, extending his hand. Our new firecracker. Only if you strike me wrong, I said sweetly. He laughed, delighted. I like you already. I didn't flinch. Because I'd seen that smile before, on the night he lied to my face while Olivia moved into my home. Theo met me in the boardroom, flanked by execs and cool silence. He didn't react when I entered. But when our eyes met, something flickered, recognition he couldn't place. Impress me, he said flatly. So I did. I laid out a restructuring plan that would increase profits, tighten internal accountability, and shift influence away from their current CFO, one of Olivia's many puppets. By the end of the pitch, even Theo looked intrigued. You're dangerous, he murmured. Only to those who underestimate me, I replied. And just like that, I was in. But I wasn't here to win them over. I was here to dismantle them, one by one, using the very tools they once used against me. And maybe, just maybe, I'd make them fall for me before I broke their hearts. Because if the universe wanted a reverse harem, I'd give it one. Just not the kind they expected. The deeper I stepped back into their world, the more effortless it became to wear the mask. L. Harlow was everything Layla Hart never dared to be, unapologetic, calculated, a woman built from sharp smiles and sharper strategy. Within 2 weeks, I was leading meetings with their senior advisors and rewriting internal protocols that no one had touched in years. The whispers in the office grew louder. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why did all 3 Rivers brothers suddenly look like they were trying not to lose their minds every time she walked into the room? Julian was the first to crack. He invited me to dinner, casual and quick, like we weren't still pretending he didn't know who I really was. You're brilliant, he said, pushing a wine glass toward me. And familiar. I can't shake it. Some things are worth remembering, I said lightly. Others? Not so much. He watched me, eyes searching. You remind me of someone I once hurt. Then let's hope I'm not her, I said, raising my glass. But inside, I was vibrating with satisfaction. Julian didn't remember Layla, not clearly, but the guilt was there, simmering under the surface. And I was going to stoke it until it burned. Micah, on the other hand, had no guilt. Just fascination. He flirted like it was breathing, compliments slipped into strategy sessions, smirks tossed like grenades in every hallway we shared. I'd say you're distracting, he told me during a planning retreat, but it's more like you're rewiring my brain. That doesn't sound healthy, I replied, typing notes without looking up. No, he said, leaning closer, it sounds dangerous. And I like danger. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze with practiced indifference. Then you're going to love what happens next. I saw the spark in his eyes then, the one that always came before a man convinced he could win me over. But I wasn't a prize. I was the storm they invited in without realizing it would level the entire house. And then there was Theo. He didn't flirt. He didn't smile. He just watched. Every meeting, every pitch, every document I touched, he examined it like it was a cipher only he could decode. It was infuriating. And exhilarating. He cornered me after a board presentation one afternoon, long after the others had left. "What's your angle?" he asked. "Everyone wants something. What if I just want to make things better?" "You don't believe that," he said. "Not with eyes like that." "And what kind of eyes are those?" I asked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The kind that have seen war. And came back to start one." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because he was right. And the worst part? He was starting to understand me. But I couldn't let that happen. Not yet. Because behind the scenes, I was already pulling the threads that held their empire together. Olivia's name was still tangled in their accounts, her influence deeply embedded in their board through fake charities and ghost consultants. I started documenting everything. Building a case. Not for court, but for collapse. The day I'd reveal it, I wanted the walls to fall so hard that even the river's name couldn't survive the echo. And yet, there were moments that shook me. Like when Julian brought me coffee, exactly the way I liked it, without asking. "You're always working late," he said. "Someone has to. Do you ever slow down? Did you ever mean what you said to her?" I shot back before I could stop myself. His face froze. "What?" "Nothing," I said smoothly. Must have been thinking out loud. Micah invited me to a party after that, a rooftop affair with far too many models and too little substance. I went anyway. Because I needed to see how far he'd go. And he did not disappoint. Halfway through the night, he pulled me aside and whispered, "Tell me to stop, and I will. Otherwise, I'm going to kiss you." "You won't," I said, lips brushing his ear. "Because you know I'm not the kind of woman you get to keep." His breath caught. And I walked away without looking back. But it was Theo who kept me up at night. Not because he touched me. But because he didn't. Because every word he spoke sounded like a warning, and every silence felt like a promise. I knew he was suspicious. I knew he was watching. But what he didn't know was that I was watching him, too. Waiting to see if the coldest of the brothers would be the one to burn for me hardest when it all came crashing down. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a countdown. And every stolen glance, every breathless moment, every time one of them said my name like it mattered, it all made the explosion more inevitable. I came for revenge. But the universe? It clearly had other plans. I never meant for things to spiral like this. One moment, I was untouchable, El Harlow, the architect of their unraveling. The next, I was standing too close to Julian in a hallway, my heartbeat betraying me as his hand brushed mine. It wasn't supposed to feel like anything. It was supposed to be leverage. But his gaze held a flicker of something too familiar, too honest, and it made me hesitate. That hesitation cost me. Because Theo saw it. From across the room, he watched the entire exchange like a hawk circling prey. And later, when he called me into his office, the air between us was tense enough to slice. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Aren't we all?" I replied. "Some of us more than others," he murmured. "I don't trust you." "You're not supposed to," I said. "You're supposed to underestimate me. That's how I win." He finally looked at me then, and the intensity in his eyes was so sharp it nearly stole my breath. "You think you've won something?" he asked. "I haven't even started," I said. "Then let me see what you look like when you lose," he said softly. "Because I think that's the only thing real about you." I left his office furious. Not because he'd seen through me. But because he almost sounded like he cared. The problem with revenge is that it's clean in theory. In reality, it's a tangle of emotion, a blur of lines you thought you'd never cross. Julian started sending me messages late at night. "I don't know why, but I feel like I've failed you," one read. "Even though I don't remember how." Another, "I dream about a girl with your voice and her heart broken in my hands." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because somewhere inside me, Layla still remembered the warmth of his hands and the lies wrapped around his kisses. But I also remembered the cold silence after he left. I couldn't let him back in. And then there was Micah, who turned his charm into intensity. He stopped joking as much. Started showing up to my meetings even when he wasn't invited. I know you're lying about something, he said one evening as we sat on the edge of a conference table after hours. But I don't care. I just want to be on your side when whatever it is hits. Why? I asked. Because I've never met anyone like you, he said. And because I think, deep down, you're doing this to survive. Not to destroy. I turned away before he could see the flicker of truth in my face. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. I was doing this to reclaim power, yes, but also to make sure the girl I once was never got stepped on again. The one who trusted too easily, forgave too fast, and stayed silent while her world crumbled. Olivia, my sister, was still in the shadows of this story. Still working her schemes, still holding shares under dummy accounts, still whispering into board members' ears. I finally confronted her at a charity gala hosted by Rivers Group. She wore a white gown, like a mockery of innocence, and didn't recognize me until I stepped closer. You look like someone I buried, she said with a smirk. You look like someone who's about to be dragged out, I replied. Careful, Liv. Ghosts don't like being mocked. Her smile faltered. You shouldn't have come back. Neither should you, I said. But I'm not here for you. I'm here to take everything you pretended to deserve. I left her fuming, unaware that Theo had been watching the entire exchange from the second floor. Later, he found me on the terrace. That wasn't just personal, he said. It was surgical. Maybe I'm both, I said. A person and a weapon. You're more than that, he said quietly. You're a reckoning. He moved closer then, slower than I expected, until his hand brushed mine with deliberate weight. Don't push me away, he said. I won't forgive easily if you do. My breath caught. And if I pull you closer? Then heaven help me, he said, because I think I'd burn everything down for you. I couldn't tell if it was a promise or a warning. But it was the first time someone saw through Al and touched the fire underneath. And for a second, I didn't want to run. But running was survival. And the final stage of my plan was almost ready. I'd been gathering the final files, proof of Olivia's corruption, the shell companies she funneled money through, the bribes, the forgeries. I planted it all strategically and scheduled the release to go public at the exact moment I presented my acquisition offer through another firm. It would be a bloodless coup. A takeover. A reveal. And by the time the dust settled, Layla Hart would be alive again, in power, untouchable. But before the clock ran out, I found myself staring at three men who had no idea they'd become part of my undoing. Julian, with his regretful eyes. Micah, with his unwavering loyalty. And Theo, who looked at me like he was already preparing to choose me over everything he'd ever built. I came for revenge. But the universe? It had clearly given me something far more complicated. I always thought the final act would feel triumphant, like standing at the top of a skyscraper I'd built from the bones of every betrayal. But as I watched my carefully orchestrated chaos begin to unfold, there was no thrill. Only a strange, suffocating stillness. The files dropped at midnight. A cascade of truths, bank records, manipulated contracts, falsified valuations, all leading back to Olivia. Her web of lies was too complex to unravel quietly, and I made sure of it. By sunrise, 4 board members had resigned. 2 legal advisors were under investigation. And Olivia? She'd gone radio silent. The brothers were caught in the middle of it. Julian showed up at my door just after dawn, his eyes hollow. She's gone, he said. No calls. No answers. Just disappeared. She'll resurface, I replied, stepping aside so he could enter. They always do when the fire dies down. This wasn't just business, he said, voice shaking. You burned everything. No, I said, pouring coffee like it was just another morning. She did. I just held up a mirror. Then why does it feel like you wanted me to see it burn? I didn't answer. Because he wasn't wrong. And that truth hurt more than I expected. Micah came next, storming into my office like a man betrayed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have tried to stop me. Damn right I would have, he snapped. You think I care about some corporate scandal? I cared about you. You cared about who I pretended to be, I said. And I couldn't afford to let that version of me fall for you. He stared at me for a long time, jaw clenched. You already did, he said quietly. That's why this hurts. And then he left. No slammed doors. No dramatic speech. Just silence. The kind that felt like a bruise spreading across my ribs. But it was Theo who finally broke me. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just sat in my office, reading every file I'd leaked, piece by piece, with the calm of a man watching his kingdom collapse. You could have told me, he said after a while. You're the only one I would have listened to. I couldn't risk it, I said. You're a Rivers. Your name is inked into every wall I came here to shake. So why does it feel like you came here to save me? I didn't respond. Because I didn't know anymore. What started as revenge had turned into something blurrier, messier. Something dangerously close to love. I should hate you, he said, standing slowly. But all I see is the woman who made me question everything I was taught to protect. Then do something about it, I whispered. Or walk away. He walked to the door. My breath caught. But then he locked it behind him and turned back. You don't get to leave me this time, he said. Not after I finally saw you. And when he kissed me, it wasn't gentle. It was everything: rage, relief, redemption. A promise forged in the ruins. We didn't sleep that night. Not really. We talked. For the first time, honestly. About the girl I used to be, the woman I became, and the man he was still trying to understand beneath the weight of a last name that no longer protected him. The next morning, Theo held a press conference. He publicly removed Olivia from any future business involvement. He stepped down from his role temporarily and named me as interim executive strategist. A title that didn't exist before but now gave me control over the rebuilding. This is Leigh L. Harlow, he said to the cameras. She is the future of this company, whether you like it or not. And then he added, she's also the only reason I still believe in second chances. It went viral in minutes. The internet had a field day. But I didn't care. Because in that moment, I didn't feel like a ghost pretending to be someone else. I felt like myself. Whole. Seen. Powerful, not because I clawed my way back, but because I finally had someone who offered me a hand and meant it. Micah eventually texted. I'm still mad. But I get it. You played the long game. Respect. Julian sent flowers. No note. Just peonies. My favorite. A small olive branch. And Olivia? She surfaced with a statement 2 weeks later, spinning a narrative about redemption and reflection. But it was too late. Her empire had already crumbled. And I was already standing where she thought I never could. The past life I'd buried was now just a scar I traced occasionally, reminder of the girl who died heartbroken and invisible. The one who was never supposed to rise again. But she did. And this time, she didn't come alone. Theo was beside me. Not as a prize. Not as an apology. But as an equal. Someone who knew every shattered piece and still chose to hold them all. I came for revenge. But what I found was far more complicated. And far more worth it. Because sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you asked for. It gives you what you were too broken to believe you deserved. Rebuilding a company from ashes is easier than rebuilding trust. The day after Theo's press conference, we sat together in the conference room, surrounded by whiteboards and blueprints, but neither of us touched the coffee. They're going to fight this, I said, scanning the list of remaining board members. Let them, he replied, eyes on me. They're not the ones I answer to anymore. Then who do you answer to? I asked. He smiled, small and tired. Myself. Finally. And me, maybe, but we didn't say that out loud. Over the next few weeks, I took the company apart and stitched it back together. We severed Olivia's shell accounts, liquidated questionable assets, rewrote governance policies, and replaced every compromised executive with someone competent and clean. The media turned me into a myth. The intern who rose to executive power. The woman who exposed corruption from the inside. They didn't know the truth. How I had lived this life once already, how every step I took was a step back through the wreckage I'd once crawled from. And how the hardest part wasn't the strategy. It was facing the ghosts. Julian requested a meeting. In person. I almost said no. But I owed him closure, or maybe I owed it to myself. He looked nervous when he walked in. You changed everything, he said. No. I just corrected the ending, I replied. Layla. I cut in. Don't pretend it was love. It was comfort. It was easy. Until I became inconvenient. He lowered his gaze. I was a coward. You were complicit, I said. But I'm not here to punish you. I just need you to know that I remember. And I've moved on. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. For everything. Then do better next time, I said. For someone else. He left without trying to hug me. I respected that. Micah was next. Always bolder. He knocked on my door during a late night at the office, 2 coffees in hand. Peace offering, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You never declared war. Maybe not, he said, sitting beside me. But I definitely lost something. What did you lose? I asked. The version of me that thought I could fix you without understanding you, he said. And maybe a chance to be more than just a side character in your story. I looked at him for a long time. Then reached for the coffee. You weren't a side character. You were one of the reasons I made it through. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah. But I think we both know you were always meant to walk away from me. I nodded. And you were always meant to root for me anyway. We clinked coffee cups like old friends and let the silence say the rest. But the only person who didn't need an invitation was Theo. He was always there, in meetings, in quiet moments, in the spaces where I no longer had to explain who I was. He saw it all. The ruthlessness. The pain. The vulnerability I hated showing anyone else. One evening, as we finalized the acquisition of a green tech firm I'd been chasing for months, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "What does it feel like?" To win? I asked. To come back from the dead. I smiled faintly. Like the world is finally playing my song instead of asking me to dance to someone else's. Good, he said. Because I don't ever want to see you dim again. That night, I kissed him without thinking. Not out of triumph. But out of relief. Out of the quiet knowledge that this man didn't just love me for what I could accomplish. He loved me for surviving. For rising. For daring to come back stronger. We kept it private. We didn't need press releases or champagne headlines. We needed trust. And slowly, we rebuilt that, too. Brick by brick. Scar by scar. At the next quarterly gala, the board publicly named me as co-CEO. I wore black again, this time not as a warning, but as a signature. Theo stood beside me when I took the stage, hand in mine. Some of you knew me as El Harlow, I said. But today, I stand here as Layla Hart. And I'm not here to fit into your system. I'm here to redefine it. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But all I felt was peace. Real, grounded peace. After everything. Olivia never came back. Her silence was her surrender. And I no longer needed to chase a confrontation that wouldn't change anything. I had taken everything she thought she could steal. And I had turned it into something better. Something mine. In the quiet after the storm, Theo and I traveled. Built a joint fund to support women founders. Launched new initiatives. We didn't run from our pasts, we used them as kindling for the future. One night, as we sat beneath the stars on a balcony overlooking a city we'd both once ruled in silence, Theo took my hand. Do you regret it? He asked. Coming back? I shook my head. I regret waiting so long to realize I never needed permission to become powerful. You were always powerful, he said. You just needed to remember. And I had. I came for revenge. But the universe gave me something better. A life I built with my own hands. A man who never asked me to shrink. And a future that wasn't borrowed or inherited, but earned. Every single piece of it.